Okay, so we're going to look at doing some unique texturing. We've done a lot of tiling texturing. We've looked at a bit of trim sheeting. Hopefully, people are getting into trim sheeting a bit. Obviously, tiling texture is very, very easy. It's nice, big, simple textures. You don't generally have overly complex textures when you come to tiling textures unless you're dealing with patterns. But so far, what we've been looking at is like painted walls, which are very, very simple, and then some kind of flooring. We've got marbling, maybe we've got some carpeting, something like that. Maybe different kind of marbling, so not the entire floor is one whole thing. And then when it comes to obviously the organic stuff, the foliage, we're getting into a little bit of unique texture in there because obviously we're making specific shapes for specific plants, and we're actually making physical large leaves and large elements and that kind of stuff. But a lot of that is produced well, from what we've looked at, the old-fashioned way inside Photoshop, just to keep it nice and simple. Again, you can do this in stuff in Painter, but it might come to where you actually want to do some unique texturing, or we will be doing some unique texturing on items. Now, this is depending on what you want to do them on. Obviously, we've got to have some unique textures somewhere. But they can be on things like maybe you've got a certain chair, you've made a really nice chair, and if you were just to apply some tiling textures over some simple stuff, it'll look good, but what it won't have is personality and history and uniqueness, hence unique textures. But it's going to be very easy to apply materials. Now that's very good if you've got a lot of the same chair that are all in good condition, because then you can obviously throw the UVs on where you want to put them, assign the different materials. Definitely, you don't have to worry about anything. However, unique textures, the benefit of this is that we can actually put personality, specific detail in, really make these objects look really, really good. The con is it takes longer, obviously, because we're spending much more time on one thing. And a big one, the UVs have to be set up properly for this. We can't half-ass the UVs. There's few rules as per usual. Again, in 2D there are millions of rules, but they're all very flexible. In 3D there are very few rules, but they're all very strict. When it comes to UVing, things for specific unique textures, one of my golden rules is the least amount of wasted space possible, within reason. What we don't want to do is have textures where all the UV islands are very small and spread apart, and the gaps in between them are massive. Because then that's just wasted data, especially if you're doing something like 4K texture, but really the amount of space you're taking up is equivalent to a 2K or a 1K texture. That's a heavily wasted bit of data. It doesn't really matter what you can see. It's not about the data that you can see, it's about the data connected to the texture. Because when you put in a texture, it just reads the image, and if you've got a lot of wasted space, it's still going to read that information. On the flip side, though, you don't want to have anything too close together or overlapping. Now, you can get very close together with these different UVs, as we're about to see. You can get very close together, especially when you're dealing with large texture sizes like 4K, 2K. You can get quite close to those, because what might look like a very, very small distance might end up being something like 20 pixels, 30 pixels, 50 pixels, whatever. So I've got a range of things here, and if you've looked on the screen there and seen, I've got 2 good and 2 bad, and 2 different UDIM setups. Now in class, obviously we talked about UDIMs, but we're going to go over it again. So let's have a look. So the 2 on the left, I've got a good UDIM and a bad UDIM, and the 2 on the right, I've got 2 good UDIM, 2 bad UDIM. And a UDIM, if we just have a look at the UV editor here, a UDIM is one of these areas here. Now we want all our textures to be in this space where we've got the green and red line here. This is the 0 to 1 space. Down here, as you can see, it says 0 right there. That's our center of the world. And then we want to go to 1 here. And now if you remember trigonometry or geometry or anything like that in maths in high school and stuff, when you're dealing with these kind of things, plotting out stuff on graphs, you've got positive and negative. So from 0, anything to the right and up, that's going to be a positive. Anything to the left and down, that's going to be a negative. So we want to have the original one. If we're just dealing with one UDIM, we want it to be in the positive 1 right here. And then if we're dealing with multiple UDIMs, then we can use the other spaces as long as we use them sensibly. So let's have a look at the first one. So this is a good UDIM. A good single UDIM. So everything in here is packed into one UDIM square, one texture sheet, which means I'm only going to need one material applied to it. I don't need multiple materials because there's like plastic and wood and metal and that kind of stuff. I only need one because we can use the techniques inside Painter to separate those materials out. Obviously, if I was dealing with something that was a tiling texture like our big pillars, our walls, I'd use two materials because I'm going to pull the big wall section, the big painted wall section from just a big old, painted wall texture that's seamless tiling, all that kind of jazz. And for any kind of skirting board, I'm going to pull that either from another tiling texture or from a trim sheet where there's going to be thinner, longer elements of different things, wood, stone, whatever. That's when I need two materials. For this, I only need one. Now let's actually have a look at the UVs. So I've crammed this in, and it's nice and compact. It looks like some things are touching, but it's not. They're very, very close together, that's all. But nothing is touching, everything's in its own little space. I've tried to find areas where I can jigsaw fit things in. So inside here, right there, this is the little screen section at the front, this little plastic section. So that's going to have a hole in it anyway in the UV, as you can see. So what I've done is I've chosen to put some stuff in there, fill the space up as much as I can. Because what that does is that brings up other spaces for me to fill some stuff in. It maximizes what I can do. And yeah, it's jigsawing in. That's all it is. So everything is in one sheet. Now this is really good because obviously I'm only dealing with one material. It's going to be nice and easy. The con of this, the negatives, is if this was meant to be, and this is what we're going to texture it as, we're going to texture it quite nicely. If this was meant to be a really nice, high resolution, beautiful object that's got to have like crazy detail on it, this wouldn't be so great because everything is crammed into one. And if you remember talking about textile density and UV island economy, all that kind of stuff, this is a UV island, one of these guys. The more I have in a UV sheet like this, the smaller my UVs have got to be, which means that one UV island takes up less pixels, which means I can dedicate less information to it. So if I want this to be a hyper-realistic object, or something that's going to be like on a splash screen when you load in, and it's going to be like really, really beautiful, I'm gonna even if I texture this at 4K, I might still end up looking a little bit kind of on the rough side. But I would do something like this if I was doing something for an in-game, in the level scatter prop kind of thing, and I will actually be texturing on this one. So yeah, the pros and cons of this. This one, everything's nice and in the same environment. All you have to do is use the black mask or white mask to kind of sort that out. To separate all them different materials away from each other. The setup to actually get it into to Painter is dead easy, and then obviously in Unreal it's just one material, dead simple. Now, I'm going to skip the bad UDIM version of this, and I'm going to go jump over to the 2 UDIM version. So this is a 2 UDIM version. So what I've done is I've chosen to separate it up into kind of chunks. I've chosen all the frame, the wooden outside section, and I've chosen that to be one UV kind of island chunk, one UV sheet. And I've moved it off to the right hand side. So this is in 0.2, or 1.2 I should say. This is in UDIM 1, 2, like here. It's in the 2. And everything else I've put on the same UV sheet here. What this does is actually maximizes the amount of space I'm able to take up. I can fill spaces better. I can dedicate more pixels to the object. It's going to give me a much nicer result. Super great. This is going to be great if I've got, again, that splash screen element or something. You've got the single UDIM object in the scene and that's scattered around, but maybe I pick it up and I have to check it, in one of these walking simulator mystery games. I pick it up and I have to rotate it to see a message, that kind of thing. In the level, I might have the single UDIM version. When I pick it up, what might happen is it loads in this version, the really, really nice version, with all these really, really nice textures, because it's going to be in front of the screen. It's going to be, analyzable by the player. Also, you would do something like this for portfolio pieces. If you wanted to do something like this and make it look really, really nice with beautiful materials for a singular portfolio piece, I'd probably end up doing something like this, because then again, I can dedicate more pixels to it and I can make it look really nice. Now, if you do something like this for your hotel, go for it if you want to. Have a play with doing this kind of thing. The only difference with this is when I go and take it into Painter, I need to set up my Painter setup a little bit differently. It's a one-click thing, and it's good and it's sorted, but I need to set up our Painter scene a little bit differently. And then when I take this into Unreal, this has only got one single material on it at the minute. But when I take it into Unreal, what I need is something like this, where I've got two materials. So this might be a little bit confusing at first. To take it into Painter, I only need one material, because I'm going to use this 2 UDIM setup, this multiple UDIM setup, to paint it. But then when I take it into Unreal, because Unreal doesn't respect UDIMs, it respects materials, I would then have to have 2 different materials. But that's very easy, because that just means I just have to grab my UVs here. For some reason, I've just noticed my UVs are different between 2 of these. Well, that's one thing you've got to be careful about. So I can get rid of that. I didn't notice that. Don't know why it's done that. So I'll copy that. So yeah, we texture it with one material applied to it from Maya. But then when we've done the texturing, when we take it into Unreal, to give us the ability to apply one material to this UV and another material to this UV, I have to have 2 materials assigned to it, which is very easy to do. Because all I've got to do is just select all the things in one UV island like that, one UV chunk, and then apply a new material to it like that. And then Unreal's going to respect it. Another thing is, when I paint it, I need to have the UVs like this. This is my single material taken into Painter. When I'm ready to take it into Unreal, I need to remember to put these UVs over on top of it. It's best to do that anyway. This isn't necessarily going to break anything. It's just best to do this, to put my UVs over here onto this. So I'm going to just stack them on top of each other. Remember that it's the materials that separate this up, not the position of the UVs. So this is going into Painter, single material. I've done my material creation. I've exported my textures. So I'm going to have one texture set for this UDIM, another texture set for this UDIM. But then when I'm ready to take it into Unreal, I'm going to stack my UVs on top of each other so that the materials are what separate it, and making sure that I actually apply a new material onto the other UV. So I've got 2 materials assigned to this. A little bit tricky when you first start doing this. It's a little bit tricky to remember, and obviously, you'll make this mistake a few times. Don't worry about it. Always make sure you've got your saves and stuff. So they're the kind of states an object like this could take up. And if I was making this like movie quality, I would have a UDIM for probably every kind of element on there. I might have something like 6 separate UDIMs. One for the dials, one for the buttons, one for the front, one for the case. If I'm doing like movie quality stuff, I'd really have to break that up. But keeping it simple, I'm just going to do a singular one like this. Now, the problem with this one here is it's exactly the same as this. The UVs are identical, but I've moved these UVs off to the right hand side. Maybe that's what I've done. I've not noticed that I've not got them stacked up on the UV space here. What's going to happen when I take that into Unreal, I will be able to see my UVs, but I won't be able to interact with them, because in Painter, this is where we interact. This grey area, this 0 to 1 space, that's what we paint on top of. We'll not be able to interact with that. If I was to take this into Unreal and not do the setup I'm about to show you, because I'm going to do kind of like 2 Painter setups to show you. If I just took this in with one material and I don't do the multi-UDIM setup, what's going to happen is I can texture on this bit here, but I won't be able to texture on this bit here, because this is going to, it basically tiles it. So whatever I do on this piece, it's going to try and do the same on this piece. So what I'm going to end up doing is having all my furniture information here, all the texture for that, kind of appearing on my wooden section, which obviously is not good. So coming back to this guy here, the multiple material one, you could take this into Painter with the 2 materials on, because these things are not connected. I know there's a lot of different variations we can do here, and that's part of the game. That's part of the thing. It all depends. I keep saying this to people when they ask me questions. What about this? What about this? It all depends. But now with this one, I could take this into Painter, like it is with the multiple materials on, with the UV stacked on top of each other, because just like Unreal, Painter does respect separating of UVs. It respects separating of UDIMs and separating of UVs, separating of materials. So what I would have when I take this in are two different material slots. So I can texture my wood separate, and I can texture my furniture separate. Now for this, that wouldn't be that bad, because obviously the wood's separate to the furniture. So I wouldn't need to worry about anything transitioning. However, if we think about characters and creatures, you know, you might have your head on one UV, and then you might have your body on another UV. But if I put a material onto my head and then a material onto my body, then that means there's no connection. In fact, let's have a look at... So we've got this geezer, and he's a large 8 foot, 9 foot tall creature, but he's also going to be, in a lot of FMVs, he's going to be very important, so we need to make sure that his texture is, you know, top. So what we have to do is look at his UVs. So this guy has already been UV'd. So we've got there. So we want to dedicate as much space as we can. So we've got one for his head, teeth, tongue, inside of his mouth, one for his body and his hands, and one for his arms and legs, and some other stuff like that. Now we could also do the UDIM thing on this, and we would do. So we'd apply one material on this guy. But what I've done here is done a bad setup. So here, we've got multiple materials across the entire body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this, and I'm going to show you what happens when you bring something like this into Painter. Make sure that was actually an FBX. There's an FBX. It is an FBX. So Painter is open. Bring it in like that, and I'm just going to start bringing him in. So File, New, Select, find our Ionian, and I'm just going to leave it as a basic setup like this. Basic setup. And I click OK. So he loads in, there we go. So we've got him there, he looks very, very nice. And then we've got the three materials here. So we've got what would be the head, so we can name that head. Make sure I'm doing it right. Head. We've got the body. Do you see an issue here? Okay. So I'm going to catch myself early on and go, right, okay, this isn't right, because I know that if this guy's body is off to the side like this, I can't do anything with it. And, oh, well, let me do a check. Okay, same thing here. His legs are all the way over there. So I won't even be able to texture that. So I'm just going to jump back into Maya and just stack these on top of the 0 to 1 space. So making sure, if I go to transform, I'll come down to this move option here, and I'll just, with this little like D-pad looking guy here, I'll just make sure this number in the middle is set to 1, because that's going to move one UDIM over. I'll just click like that. I'll select these guys and click twice. There we go. So I'll re-export this. Just override the one I've just done. Yep. Let's jump back into Painter. I'm just going to edit, re-import mesh to update the mesh. And there we go. So now all the UVs are on there. So I've got head, I've got body, oops, and I've got legs. Cool. Great. So I'm excited and I want to start texturing. So what I'm going to do is start texturing. So I'll go to my head. Cool. I start. Oh. Well, I want to blend. I want to blend that. I want to go into his body. Oh, okay. So I've got to go into his body now. So okay. So that looks okay because it's a flat color. But when I come to start doing detailing, what's going to happen is I'm going to have a very, very obvious line separation. I'm going to see this very obvious line where neck meets body. This is the thing we had in the old days where we had to really work hard to make sure these two blended in, because we were doing it in Photoshop back in the old days. And at a point, we were also doing it in ZBrush. We were painting in ZBrush, but that was kind of rubbish. So yeah, that's a bit of an issue. Right, okay. So that's the difference with the UDIMs, well, with multiple materials. If it's all one solid objects and it's connected to each other, I need to have the UDIM approach, okay? So what I'll do is for this guy, I'll just do the UDIM approach. So I'll just Control Z back until I am actually like this, because if I know that I'm going to do the multiple UDIM approach, what I need is them laid out like this, because I need them all to not be stacked on top of each other. And then I'm just going to apply one material to him. There you go. So he's only one material now. I'll re-export him. Override that Ionian. Jump into here, do the new. Now this time, and we would do this with anything there's multiple UDIMs. All I've got to do is obviously make sure I grab my object I want to work on, and then where it says UV tile settings UDIMs cannot be changed later. Remember that. I want to go to use UV tile workflow, so I want to keep that ticked on. And I'm just going to use the first one, preserve UV tile layout per material and enable painting across tiles. That is what I want. So I want to do that now. Yeah, I want to discard. We get is this. So we only have one material now. If we look at our texture set list up here, we've only got one material, our Lambert 1, which is our whole body. But if I look at my UV sheet here, you can see that all the different UVs are there. And the UV space looks a bit different as well. Now we've got something like in Maya, we've got these little individual grids. Now, to be honest, I work with this turned on even on single UDIM things anyway, because if I just might as well keep it on. It's not going to change anything. So in our body here, we've got a little drop down that we didn't have before with the multi-material approach. We've got basically a UV, so 0, which is 0, 1, which is 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, which is here, 1, 0, 0, 2, which is here, 1, 0, 0, 3, which is here. This would be 2, 0, 0, 1, 2, 0, 0, 2, 2, 0, 3, and so on and so forth. You get it. But what this means is I can actually texture across the lines. I can texture across all these different sections without any problems. Again, when I'm finished texturing, I will have to go in there and make sure that I've then got multiple materials assigned to him, and they're all stacked on top of each other, so that in the engine I can apply everything correctly. But just while I'm texturing it, this is what we want to do. So, all that being said, just to make sure that we understand as much as we can the multiple UDIM setup, I'm back in here. I'm just going to grab my single UDIM, so we're back into the single UDIM. I'm just going to export this, so, oops, make sure the thing's at the bottom of the ground, like that. I'm going to export. I'm just going to call this radio. Oh, well, it'll be SM, because it's a single mesh, or static mesh, sorry. Static mesh radio. And obviously I'm putting this on the desktop, but you would put this into your Maya project folder. There we go. Right, so now if I go back to Painter, I go File, New, find my radio. Again, if you leave this on and you're only dealing with a single UDIM object, it doesn't matter. But let's turn it off for now. Let's just keep it as like the standard. This is what your standard thing is. Click OK. And we're ready to go. So we've got our lovely texture there, with our lovely model there, and everything looks good. We don't see any issues with the mesh or anything like that. That's good. Obviously, I've made sure to go through, make sure it's like all the edges that I want to be smooth, all the edges that I want to be sharper, hardened, so that I can get as much really nice high poly information in on this level here. So at this stage, we are ready to start texturing finally. And before we actually start doing stuff, we need to set up the object. So luckily we've only got one material here, so let's just call that radio to keep things nice and professional. So in our texture settings here on the right hand side, remember if your UI doesn't look like mine, that's because let me reset the UI. What I do is I just kill this Substance 3D assets, kill that, don't need it. I rip off my assets drop down and actually put that on my other monitor. So that's just out of the way. I don't use that enough to always be needing it in front of me, but I do use it a lot, obviously. And then my properties here, I drag that over to the left hand side, just because that's a long menu and it's got a lot of information in that I want to get access to the whole thing, which means I can also have a nice big layer stack here. So I can have a nice clear view here. Just good screen economy in my opinion. Of course, because you can rip all these things off, you can technically have everything on another monitor and just have this whole space dedicated to just a workflow. I don't like doing that personally. Luckily, I've got my main monitor here is an ultra wide, so I can actually have a very good layout. But on a 16:9 like this, you just got to make sure that you're seeing as much as you possibly can. Pardon me. Okay, so let's do a save. So let's start the project. We brought stuff in, we've set it up, we had a check, everything looks good. Let's actually start doing some stuff. So we're gonna Again, I'm going to save this as sm underscore radio. And I would save this into the images folder of my Maya project, obviously. Now this is very good because obviously we've got a place where we can, from now on, just hit Control S. We don't even need to do incremental saves, just hit Control S. But what it's also doing is creating auto saves every few minutes, which, you know, if it does crash, which, you know, we have discovered that little bug in class that I wasn't aware of until like a couple of weeks ago. If you do crash, it means that you can either use your auto saves or you just know where the project is. Okay, so we've saved it, we're ready to go. First thing we do, before we start putting any material stuff on here, you know, we're 25 minutes in, we'll finally get going. First thing we do is we need to create maps for these. Now, these maps won't actually be exported at the end, we won't actually see them. These maps are more like tools we're going to use to allow us to do stuff. It's going to allow us to add some really, really nice detail and control it using these additional maps here. These are really, really easy to do as well, because, well, we'll explain it as we go. So I'm going to texture set settings, bake mesh maps, and there we go. So this is the bake mesh map menu. Bake mesh maps. So what's going on screen? So we've got obviously our viewport here with our object. We've got some settings for the object, like visual settings here. We can hide. We've got a little drop down here where we can see things we're about to create. On the left hand side here we've got the texture set list. If we had multiple materials we'd be able to see all of them here, but we've only got one on this radio, so we can see that. And then below that we've got all the different maps we're going to create. And these have all got, well, some of them have got menus attached to them. So common settings is the whole bake kind of common setting. Output size, we can decide how big these output maps are going to be. Now again, because these maps aren't actually going to be used in the final texture that we're going to export, I don't see the point in not baking these at the highest resolution possible unless you want to bake them at a low resolution, because the resolution will give you a certain feel, a certain quality to the things you're about to do. But for me, I always bake at 8K. Just bake at the highest resolution. Now we can't change this later on. We obviously are aware that while we're texturing, we can decrease and increase the document size as we want to, you know, speed up the process, see what it looks like at 4K, and, you know, jump in between them. This one we do it once and that's it. You can always come back in and rebake at a higher resolution, but for now that's it. So that's output size. The second one I'm going to change is high poly parameters. So high poly parameters are used for if we're using a high poly mesh to pull normal information from, like curvature information from. Now we don't have a high poly mesh of this, we're just going to deal with this one object. So what I'm going to do is just click use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. Now what this is going to do is not give us like the most shockingly amazing results, but at this point we don't need to worry about that. So boom, set that. And the rest of these I'm just going to leave alone. You can hover over and it'll give you a kind of a breakdown of what it does, and you can read into them if you want, but I'm just going to leave them for now. Okay, so the other settings, but normal, there's no settings in that, that's cool. World space normal, there's no settings in that, that's cool. ID, there is some settings in this, but we don't actually want to use an ID map, so we're going to ignore this. Now you can actually untick this ID to actually not use it. You can untick any of these if you don't want to use them, but we're basically going to make all of them. This one is just going to give me a color map, like it's just going to give me a flat color, probably grey, and that's fine. You know, that's all. We're not even going to use the ID maps or whatever. The ambient occlusion, that's got quite a lot of settings in, but I would be careful. I generally leave these alone. If anything, I just might increase the secondary rays a little bit, but if you start messing with these, you can actually mess up how the ambient occlusion works, or kind of produces itself, which is not good, obviously. Again, read into these if you want to, see what they do. So I'm just going to restore default. The curvature, now this one is really good, because this is one of the most important maps, where it's going to produce a map which is going to control where things can, like if you think about dust builds up in concave areas, and you think about edgeware where things have been knocked and banged a lot, that's going to give us the ability to add that convex information. And how do we produce it? Well, we're producing it from generating from mesh right there. So it's actually going to use the mesh to generate it. Now, if I was generating this from a pre-existing normal map, I would use this pre-existing normal map thing here. But we're only using it from generated, so that's fine. Position, This is its position in the world. Thickness, how thick an element is. So if it's thin, it gets darker. If it's thick, it gets whiter. And the other three, we're not actually going to use. Because these are things that, for this, we're not going to use anything. We're not going to use height. We're not going to use bent normals. Or we're not going to use opacity. Cool. So with all that being said, just making sure that my output's at 8K. Use low poly, high poly. All the other settings I've not touched. I'm just going to click Bake Selected Textures. And what you'll see is these maps actually start generating. So this is your normal map, and then you'll have your world space normal map, which look very similar. And then you're going to have an ID map, which is just grey. And then you're going to have an ambient occlusion. There's the ambient occlusion. And then you're going to have a curvature. The curvature looks really messed up at first, but when he actually finalizes it, it's fine. Then you got your position map, and then you'll have your thickness map, and then we're done. That's our thickness map there. Cool. And then, when that's done, and I'm happy, I can actually return to paint mode. There we go. So our object also looks a little bit better, because what it's done is, if I look at my texture set settings here, in my Bake Mesh maps, you can see now we've got these different maps. So we've got a normal map, world space normal, all this kind of stuff, ambient occlusion, thickness. It's great stuff. So here, the ambient occlusion is actually kind of being applied to the object. So if I just kill that ambient occlusion there, you'll see it kind of loses its depth. Which is very, very cool. And like I said, these maps are incredibly useful for what we're about to do. So let's do it. So first of all, what I'm going to do is, before I start getting off on the really, really fun stuff, I'm just going to go and make folder groups for all the different material elements. So what have I got? So I want to wrap this whole thing in some sort of cheap looking wood. It's because I'm imagining this is some sort of like 1960s, 1970s radio, like cheap balsa wood kind of thing. So I want wood. So let me make a folder for that. Wood. Wood. There you go. I want that screen is going to be like a fabric, so I'm going to call it fabric. Then I want the frame around the screen, and this little bit here, I want this to be kind of like cheap, either plastic gold, you know, plastic that's made like gold, or very, very cheap metal, so I'm going to call that metal. I want to have a bit of maybe, okay, well, we've got around the back here. Actually, let's stick to the front, do the front first. I'll do plastic, because I can put a few things, a little subgroups in this, but I'll do plastic. I'll put dials for little 2 dials on the side. I'll put buttons for the like 12 little, or the 10 little buttons I've got at the top, at the bottom, well. And I've got the screen. Or the display, call it display. There we go. Now around the back, what have I got? So I've got, this is probably going to be made of some sort of like, what do you call it? Like particle board, kind of, you know, sawdust chips that have been kind of compacted together. So I'm going to call that board, backboard, backboard, screws. The radiator, and in fact, I'll put this little guy here, back here, where there would be like, oh, that's where the wire would be coming out for the plug. I'll keep that with screws, and my feet, I'll put that with screws as well. So I'll put my screws, that little plug, and my feet in one. In fact, you know what I call that bits. I often do this with textures. If I've got a lot of like really, really small bits that, you know, are just whatever, I'll put those in their own little group and just texture those, because they're all going to be very, very simple. Cool. So what I've done, first of all, I've gone through and made sure I understand what elements I'm doing. Again, when you're dealing with big tiling textures, you don't need to think about this too much. But when you're dealing with an object which has got multiple real-world materials, you want to be organized. So I'm being organized here. And then I can go through and just start adding a material into each one of them. Because what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to add a material in and then use a black mask on the folder to then isolate that off. So inside there, I'm going to add material, just keep it a colour for now, and I'm going to make it a red for now. And then to this wood group, I'm going to add a black mask, and then to that black mask, I'm going to add a paint. Or in fact, I don't really need to add a paint to this, do I? I can add a because I'm not painting in. All I'm doing is filling in the UVs, so I can just do this on the actual mask itself because I've not painted it in. I'll add modifiers on things that I'm going to, modify. So this, I'm just going to press 4 for my polygon fill. So that's 4, and it's also this little guy here. I'm going to come up to the little checkerboard. That's the UV chunk fill, and I'm just going to click my wooden sections. So make sure I've got my wooden sections there. Make sure I'm not over doing anything. Nope. So I've only got my wooden sections. That's cool. Also, I've just noticed my wireframe is on. So if you want to turn on or off your wireframe, it's only on because I'm in polygon fill mode. There we go. And then my fabric. So again, I'll do the same thing. I'll just add a fill layer into that fabric. Just keep it color for now. I'll just add a color to that, and then to that fabric group, I'm going to add a black mask, polyfill, add that. Cool. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to go through and add these different materials and colorize everything so we can see how it's all laid out. And I'm going to add a mask off to each one of them so we can keep track. Cool. Back in a second. Okay, so we've taken a few minutes there just to add base materials to each one of them. Just give it a color. You don't have to give it a color, but I like doing it because I can see if I've missed anything. I can see if I've assigned the wrong material to the wrong area, overmasked something, undermasked something, all this kind of jazz. It's all about that, prepare to fail, fail to prepare kind of thing. So if I take a few minutes at the very beginning just to make sure that it's set up right, less can go wrong later on. I can make less mistakes later on. But as you can see, everything's got a bit of a colour assigned to it, so I know what's what and stuff and what. Cool. This is great. So now what I can do is just start doing some stuff. So I'm going to start by closing all these. And I will say, I did say this in class, that one of the other things that might stress people out about doing this unique texturing is your layer group here, your layer set here, is going to get a bit busy, because you're going to be adding a lot more detail into it, and there's going to be, at least in this case, there's a lot of little bits, a lot of little areas that I'll be dealing with. So organization is good. This is why these folders are really good as well. And obviously you can put folders in folders in folders in folders, which I'm probably going to do, on some of these, but especially in like the bits bit, I'll have a folder for all the bits. And then I'm going to have a folder for the screws, a folder for the feet, a folder for the little thing, and then I'll have that masked up. So you can just basically keep going down in these kind of like groups. I don't mind being super organized. Again, if I set it up early, it makes less stress for me later on. Cool. So what I'm going to do is hide all that, and just deal with this, and just deal with this. So I'm going to start off by making this wood, and it's going to be some cheap kind of balsa wood. So I just need to eyeball in some kind of color at first. So this is my mid-tone I'm going to be going for at first. There's no roughness, I'm just dealing with color as well. So like that. Again, I can always change it. The whole way we've been working with textures so far is not changing. I'm still going to be using this very non-destructive way of working. Black masks and modifiers, so that if I need to change the color or something, it's not like I've painted down and committed. I'm just changing the main layer here that's associated with it right there. So remember, when you've got masks applied to stuff, you've got the mask, and then to the left you've got the thing that it's attached to. For us down here, it's going to be the material and then the mask of the material. It's like that. I'm going to duplicate this layer, call it dark, and this is going to be the dark elements of my wood. Again, Photoshop. So on the right hand side we've got our little layer blending tab. I'm just going to put this to multiply for now, and I'm going to now start applying that black mask, and then I'm going to apply a fill to that black mask, and then just decide what I'm going to do. So if I bring in my assets here, now I know that if I type in, it's right there. So there's this anisotropic noise here. It's like directional strippy noise. One thing I would never do if I'm doing something like this, unless I've gone and found the perfect texture for it somewhere else, or the perfect alpha for it. I know I'm doing wood here, but I'm not going to search for wood. because what they've got here is some not necessarily great wood alphas. These are okay, but they're a bit horrible, especially this one. Very, very not good. And I don't find those particularly useful. I'm also not going to use any of these, for this anyway, I'm not going to use any of these wood materials to start off with. And I don't want you to do that either. I want you to build your own materials. Learn how to deal with these. Again, it is just Photoshop. It's just, or Clip Studio, or Procreate. It's just pixels. So I know that there's a really nice noise texture called anisotropic. So I'm going to click and drag that in. And you're going to see it come in like that, which is nice. Obviously, it's facing the wrong way. So I'm going to start rotating it around until it's facing the right way. And you'll notice as well that some of my seams here aren't lining up. I've done that on purpose. So I've actually changed the way I did it in class. I've re-UV'd the object. And I've actually cut up all these different panels of the wood so that if I imagine it being constructed in real life, I've got the two side panels that have been nailed onto the two top panels. So I've actually got clear ends here. Now what you will need to do as well is if I've got UVs that like all my UVs are going like they're all horizontal, so the grain goes in the same direction. If you find that you've like rotated one 45 degrees or something, 90 degrees, and then you know this one is going in the vertical direction, but this one here is going horizontally, all you got to do is in your wood section here, just make two wood sections. So copy this whole layer off, unmask the areas which are going horizontally, and the areas that are kind of going the wrong direction. With this modifier in here, all you've got to do on that specific one is just rotate it. So you'll have two wood sections. Maybe the two top long panels, they're going in the right direction. Maybe the two side panels, they're going like that rather than going up and wrapping around. So you're going to want to grab those two side panels in their own little group and just rotate them so the grain's going in the right direction. Anyway, the shape, this information is too big, so I'm going to tile it, let's say 5. Okay, maybe a bit too big, so maybe I'll tile it as 4. Maybe tile it as 3. Maybe I tile it as 2. What if I just do 2 tile? I think 2.5. Okay, yeah, 2.5 feels nice. It gives me a nice amount of information without being like super, super grainy. Awesome. And now what I'm going to do is just duplicate that guy. So the reason I'm going to duplicate this dark layer is because this already has a lot of the same information that I want. So if you're dealing with anything that's got natural grain like wood, like stone, and you've already got a modifier which is doing some stuff, you can just literally grab that, duplicate it, and then change the color parameters, change either the color or the layer blending, and then modify the modifier a little bit to, you know, offset it something. So what I'm going to do is literally just duplicate, Control D. So now it gets really dark. Doesn't look that bad actually, but it's not what I want. I'm going to start messing with some of the layer blends for this. So I'm going to go through until I get something that's a lighter color. Like overlay, and then maybe make it a bit more yellower, like that, just so it's a bit lighter. So it's going to give me that impression. So if I turn off my dark, it's going to give me that. And what I'm going to do now is just grab the modifier, because I duplicated that layer with the modifier, just Control D. With that modifier, what I'm going to do is just start messing with it. I'm not going to start messing with the tiling, but I'm going to start messing with the offset. There you go. And then I can, you know, now that I can see the results, I can make adjustments. So maybe I make it a bit, maybe not an overlay. Maybe I do something like a, oh, it's too much. Like that. No, that's too bright. I think a screen. So, yeah, I'm just messing with some of the colours here. Okay, like that. I'm happy with that. That looks okay. So I'm just going to shift around the light as well. So shift and right click. I can rotate the light round, so I can just get a better idea. Nice. Okay, so we're getting some wood in there. It's very straight though. It's very, very straight. So I'm just going to add a maybe 1 or 2 modifiers to each of these just to add a bit more kind of bend to this. So add a filter. I'm going to do my dark first. So if I just hide my light. And I'm going to add a filter. So that filter, I'm going to add, we've got directional warp, slope blur. In fact, I'm just going to see what a slope blur, I like me a slope blur, so see what it does. Obviously that's not great, but what I'm going to do is change the intensity divider to 10. This means that this slider here, the intensity slider, has to work more to get the results. So, boom. I'm just going to start to fracture it up a touch. Just alter this a touch. Something like that. Crisp it up a little bit. And then I can also mess with some of the parameters here. You know, just to mess it up a little bit. I like that. It kind of gives it a bit of a fibrous feel, which is nice. I'll press C actually, so I can just see the... I'm pressing C on the keyboard to cycle through my channels, just so I can see my base color. I like that. That's looking nice. And then I'm going to, on top of that, I'm going to add another filter and call it Warp, which is at the bottom. Again, too much. But I can just go through some of the settings. Now, if you find as well that you can't go, like with a standard slider, if you can't go far enough, in the little number field, just input a number, and what it'll do is it'll, if I put in 5 in this, it'll put 5 to be the middle of the slider, which technically gives me 10. So I can add more range to my... more range to it, so that I can just go again, just... Right, that's kind of like really, so we'll go back to there. Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay, I like that a lot. So that's giving me a nice fibrous kind of wood. And I think on top of this as well, so these have both got repel? I don't know what repel is. Can't remember what repel is. Oh, replace. Okay. And again, go through these settings, because each one of these modifiers does have a blend mode to it, and some of them you do have to be aware of. So if we're on replace, I'm just going to cycle through and see what all these different things. Is there any other layer blends that give me a better result? So there's one back there I didn't mind, like that one. I didn't mind what's that light in. But just for now, I'm just going to replace. So you can see what goes on. In fact, I'll just bring that intensity slider down a touch. Yeah. Cool. And one more thing, I'm just going to add a... Oh, it's saving. There we go. Thank you for saving. I'm just going to add a fill. And in this, what I want to do is just put a bit of bird eyeing, I guess I'd call it. If anyone's very familiar with wood, I am a bit of a woodophile. I love wood grains and stuff. In noise, we should have some like dirt and dirt 2 and something like that, where it's like specular dots rather than like big clusters of noise. We've got specular dots, and what I want to do is just like get some like dirt 2, drag it in, and it gives me these spots. Now obviously that's overriding all the modifiers below it, so I'm going to change this layer blend so it works with everything else. So again, what we're going to do is cycle through, see what works best. The best one's going to be linear dodge add, because of black and white stuff, that really, really works well. And then I can, you know, change this to give me the result that I want. Something like that. You know, just adding a bit of detail to it. Cool. So that's good. And then I could go through that and do the exact same thing to the lighter version. In fact, I'll call that light. Yeah. There we go. So that's going to give me this, and it looks, looks quite nice. It looks very neat though. So as I went through in class, like this could be, it's just been bought fresh out the bag. There's no scratches. It's all nice and varnished and stuff. Doesn't show how cheap it is. But then, you know, a few years down the line, if it's been in a house or an environment where it's going to get used a lot, it's going to have cups put on top of it and stuff, we're going to start getting a little bit of wear and tear, a little bit of noise appearing. Just going to upset that roughness. So what I'm going to do is just add a new layer above it. And I'm just going to deal with roughness this time. And, you know, I'm just going to deal with the roughness. Now, because I'm solely dealing with the roughness, I'm also going to come up to my layers and change my roughness here, change the roughness here. Because any of the opacity sliders or layer blends I work with here currently working with base color, the color stuff. But if I want to change the opacity of roughness, the layer blend of a roughness, I need to change this to roughness. And again, black mask, add a fill layer. So I've added that roughness in there, add a fill. And then to that fill, I'm going to start adding something, some noise. Now I do know, actually in Marble, there is a nice kind of noisy texture for this I quite like. And it's one of these two, so it's marble, it's grunge marble sharp shapes or grunge marble veins. I'm going to use grunge marble shapes because this kind of looks like, I don't know, it looks messy. I like it. Like that, and then we could just play with some of that. And there's also the roughness of the initial base layer as well, because these two layers are currently just colour, so they're not having any roughness imparted on them. So if I turn on the roughness here, I can control the initial roughness of the object here. So I'm going to set it to quite light, which means this new roughness I'm applying is I'm going to be taking away roughness. And again, with everything on this, I've got some kind of, you know, controls. I've got tiling, rotation, offset. I've got balance. I've got contrast. I've got mode, brush stroke. Yeah, all this kind of jazz that I can just. There we go. So that's nice, and you know, I'm getting a bit of roughness on there. It's quite nice. I'm going to put another roughness on there because this is nice, kind of broad roughness, but maybe I want some I would call it like very sharp roughness without being like super sharp. So with this, it's a new fill layer, so I'm going to change this to linear dodge add because I'm using black and whites and they need to work well together. And in this, I'm just going to look for my noises, and I'm going to bring something like. I don't know. So let's try this clouds one. There we go. I saw that kind of shift then. In fact, what I'm going to do as well, because I'm dealing mainly with my 3D view at the minute, I'm going to come up here, and I'm also going to change this to 3D only, so I can only just see my 3D view. So if I turn that on and off, yeah, and then I can, oops, I control that, control the opacity of that. So. Okay, cool. So we're starting to kind of like chip away some of that lacquer, chip away some of that, or rough up some of that surface. It's starting to, you know, look a little bit more realistic. I am going to glaze this object now as well, so I'm going to bring in a new fill layer, make it red. I'm going to do like an overlay on this one, or something that's going to. Oh, well, I'm in colour mode, aren't I? So I'm doing colours again, so I need to shift back to base colour. I always forget to do that. Yeah, so I'm just using colour. In fact, I'm going to put some of the roughness, because this would be affected by the roughness. And yeah, so I'll just put red for now, and I'll just start messing with this, put an overlay on. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm just kind of like varnishing the object a little bit. Not much, just varnishing it a little bit, because this next bit is going to be fun to do. So let me just make it a bit dark, a bit warmer. Okay, so I put that underneath the roughness. So the roughness is still affecting it. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip forward 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And now it's starting to take a little bit of damage. And I can go through and add these things to whatever I want. It doesn't have to be just color as well. I can do this kind of thing on roughness layers, height layers, whatever. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start chipping away at that varnish to expose the wood underneath it. And then I could even do something else later on to expose even newer wood, basically line it up. And this does actually need me just it's good to look at our texture set settings before I do this. Because currently we're looking at this as a 10. So this is a 1K texture, and that doesn't look that bad for a 1K texture. You know, you'll be surprised at what you can get away with. This is a relatively small texture. 1K is nothing, but we're getting a lot of nice detail. But what's going to happen now is when we're starting getting really, really nice detail, it might not be necessarily very crisp and clean at first. So what I want to do is texture this at 2K or 4K while I'm working, knowing that when I output this at say 1K, I am going to lose a bit of detail, but I'm just getting a better sense of the detail through this. So what I'm going to do is just set in my texture set settings, set that to 4K. So now we're really, really nice and crisp. You see all that lovely detail. And to that new glaze I've just added on, I'm going to add, again, a black mask. And to that black mask, I'm going to add a generator. Now these need those maps we made at the beginning, those bake mesh maps. These need those to work. And what a generator is, it's kind of like, it's a function that is run. It's a process which is run, which creates stuff. It creates results depending on what you choose to do. Now some very clever people have actually produced their own generators as well, not just the ones that are in here. But I'm going to use some of the basic ones inside here first. So generator. Now that we've got that generator modifier in, generator, we've got 3D distance. Sorry about that. So we got our generators here. We've got 3D distance, 3D linear. We've got ambient occlusion, which is useful. Auto stitch. It's good to go through and just have a play with some of these and see what they do. So like light, for instance, light simulates light in the scene. So we've got the color there. So if I start to change some of these. Like direction, I can change the direction of light. It's not actually light, but what it's doing is using, as you can see here, position and world space position to trick light. And you don't have to use that to produce light. You can use that to highlight stuff. You know, they're just generated to do whatever you want with. What I'm going to use is something called metal edgeware. There we go, metal edgeware. Now what this does, yes, it says metal edgeware. It doesn't mean I have to use it for metal though. I'm going to click that. There we go. And what it does is it uses the world space normal, position, curvature, and ambient occlusion to generate where, you know. And I can increase and decrease this information to rough it up a little bit. As you can see there. That's quite nice. Now it's kind of doing it the opposite way around to what I want it to do, because it's making the areas that I want to be lighter darker, which doesn't look bad. It's just, for me, it's not what I want. So I can invert the entire thing like this. So what it's doing is it's, instead of getting rid of that varnish completely and leaving it behind in on the corners, what it's doing is it's keeping the varnish, but it's getting it rid in the corners. And you see these parameters just are there to be messed with. That's quite nice. So now we're starting to get some really nice history on the object. Now once again, you can stack some of these up. So I can use an edgeware, this metal edgeware, to kind of give me this overall kind of feel. So if I hide some of these, you'll be able to see what's going on. So this is giving me a little bit of wear around the edges here, and it's giving me some overall stuff there. But I can set it so it's just dealing with them corners, or I can go through some of the settings and find my best settings. So maybe I want this to be just this particular one. I want this just to be the edge wear like that. It's going to give me something like that. Okay. And then I can add another generator on top of that. Make sure it's, again, linear dodge add so they can go through each other. And on this one, I can do dirt, for instance, or I can do fiberglass, or I can do curvature, you know. So let me do curvature. And again, I can see that this is basically doing it the opposite way around. I'm getting rid of the varnish there, but I want it to be only getting rid of varnish in the corners. I'm just going to make this kind of a bit strong. Yeah, like that, kind of. And in the curvature generator, we've got a curvature setting here, so you can actually go through and do some settings. So again, we've got the inverses there. We've got this edge mode. So if we do edges, cavities, dual, and process. So this, if we look at the actual curvature map, so it'll always look better on a high resolution, smoother mesh. That's why I was saying at the beginning, we don't have to worry about it for now. But grey is flat. The lighter the colour, the more convex the corner is. The darker the colour, so in these recesses, the more concave the colour is. So I can change these to only process across the lighter areas, or only process across the cavities, the darker areas, or both. And then I can, I guess I just hide these for now. I can deal with the information that's being used as well. So if I just put all these sliders down to 0, I can say, okay, what does the sharp information do? This isn't really doing anything. Okay. What does fine information do? It's not doing anything. Oh, a little bit when we stack it up. Again, on a much more dynamic, much more high resolution mesh with a lot more kind of curvature and, you know, less right angles, we're gonna get a better result there. Soft. Okay, now we're getting a bit of soft there. Medium. Okay, we're getting a bit medium there, so we can start to kind of play with these a little bit. Large. Oh, there we go. So we can like that. Big. There we go. Huge. Like that. And then contrast is as you would expect contrast to do. And brightness is as you expect brightness to do. Very cool. So again, using all these kind of things, stacking them on top of each other, we start to get some really, really nice results. As long as we allow things to work with each other. Now what I can also do at this point is I'm only dealing with colour, so I'm going to start to put some roughness in there. That's a bit of roughness. I can also like maybe see what height does. Okay, height does this. It looks terrible, but we're not going to do any of that then. Or maybe if we do, we just touch it a little bit. Actually, no, we're not going to do it on that, because I'm going to come down to light underneath there. I'm going to come down to this one, the dark, and I'm going to put a generator on this, and do another metal edge wear. Just go through the setting so it doesn't actually distract. There we go. And there I'm starting to kind of take chunks out of the mesh a little bit. That linear dodge add is. There we go. There we go. So again, I kind of got some of the layer blendings kind of in the wrong position, but now I'm starting to take chunks out of it. Now I'm really starting to upset the object a little bit. You know, if I wanted to add height, I'm going to add it like really, really subtly. So we're going in, so it's going to be minus 0.001, for instance. You know, I've always got to be very, very careful with height. Height is a very damaging surface, damaging a parameter if I'm not careful. It kind of looks a bit naff. But I'm really, really subtle with it. It doesn't actually look that bad. Question mark? Yeah, it's alright. And I'm going to add it on this one. Oop, that's very strong. But what I'm going to do is also go back to my little top layer here, go to height, and I can actually start turning this down on these, so I can turn the height that this is dirt's going to do. I can turn it down to this. And this. There we go. Yeah, so I can start to get a bit of personality in there. That's what we're doing. Now it's also really good to do. Waiting for a sneeze to go through. Oh, what be? It's not just solely relying on these generators, because generators are good and all that, but they'll only really work with the surface that you give it, and if the surface that you give it, like this, is lacking a little bit, you're going to get some issues. But one thing we can do is just go and paint the information that we want in. So, for instance, this one, what I'm going to do is add a paint modifier onto this, and then I can paint the information that I want in. So, and that's great because it's all just based, I don't have to erase anything, it's all just based off my paintbrush. So if I press 1 on the keyboard, on my paintbrush, so if you press X, you can jump in between white and black. So black is taking it away, so I can remove, and white is adding, so I can add. And if I just get a nice brush, so a clear noise filter, get a brush, get a suitably noisy brush, and these are all Photoshop brushes as well, so if you find something in Photoshop that works, you can import it in. I'm just gonna find something that could, resemble wood chips or something, because I've got to think this is varnished, or okay, how these things were made. It was made of very cheap wood, and the varnish that with the lacquer that was on it wasn't even a varnish. The lacquer was very cheap, so after a while, when it gets knocked and stuff, the lacquer starts to peel off and becomes almost like very, very thin plastic. So it's going to splinter off. So I want something that's going to be able to splinter. I don't want softness necessarily. So maybe something like that. Dirt splash. So I click that. So now I'm using the dirt splash brush. There we go. And I can just, get my settings. I've got all my position jitters, my angle jitters, flow jitter. I can start taking bits off that I want to. Maybe around certain areas that I know are going to get knocked a lot. So around the corner here, I can come in and just be like, just knock this off. So as an aside as well, when we're dealing with brushes, actual paint brushes, there's two settings that I want to make sure that I'm kind of being aware of. And it's in your brush menu on your side here, when I'm in my brush. And if you scroll down underneath all your Photoshop stuff, you've got alignment and size space. Alignment is, if I'm texturing something like this, the tangent planar basically means this all relates to the 2D surface. If I've got my brushes, technically, even though I'm overlapping here on the 3D version, on the 2D version, I might be overlapping two different UVs. Because if I just have a look at the UV surface now, there we go. So if I'm texturing like this, and I'm accidentally overlapping over across two UVs like this, I might accidentally start texturing both sides. That's what I don't want. So what I tend to do is just set this to UV, so it's only going to affect the UV that I'm on, which might be an issue with stuff like this, because obviously this is two different UV sets because the UV is split across the middle there. But I just change this setting when and if I need to, so I can just kind of take a chips away at that. Chips away at that. If you want to grab your brush and do this with an actual brush, that's fine. And another great thing about this is I'm altering the way that this looks, but really it's just a modifier. So if I hide that modifier, all the original information comes back. It's great. And again, I'm just flipping between X and Z, I'm flipping between white and black using X. Black means I'm going to be taking it away, white means I'm going to be adding it. So I can add back information that I want, I can take away information that I want. So I can just kind of come in there and stroke down. And I'm using my mouse at the minute, but obviously you can use pens and stuff. So I can, you know, do all this lovely stuff. Take a bit of time and just add a bit of personality. Think about your object. A lot of places do have, it's a bit trendy to have, like, you know, antiqued stuff. Unless you're like really, really high class and everything's like minimalist, you can't, you know, it's cool to have this antique stuff. So you can see they've got a bit of history on there. Maybe this edgeware here is just a little bit too uniform, so I can come in here. Let's change my flow jitter so it's a bit more random and bring down my flow in general. And I can just gently add some of this information back in. I'm going to have more edgeware across corners than you do across straight lines like this, but you're still going to have information being chipped away. Where I'm not going to have loads of chipping is around like flat areas and obviously convex areas. So I can do this. I can just use a big brush. I'm using like quite a noisy brush as well, so that I'm not just painting blocks out. I'm using a nice noisy brush so that some of the information I'm painting out or in is a bit on the random side. But some of it is just quite simple, just to lightly stroke it in. Oh yeah, yeah. Hour in 10. Nice and simple, and maybe I just some points where it's really had the shit kicked out of it. Nice. So you can add that really, really nice detail, and of course you can add stains, you can add whatever you want, because everything's just being contained within this one layer folder here. And like I said before, you can have layers inside of layers. So if I want to do something with, I'm going to make a stain. So I'm going to make a layer group like this. I'm going to call it stain. And inside this layer group, I'm going to have all the materials put together that's going to make a stain. So I'm going to have, I don't know, let's just make a random stain. So it's just going to be color, and I'll deal with height, I guess, later on. Let's just, I don't know, start. It's going to be very dark. Maybe it's like some sort of araldite glue stain. So that's my base color, and then I'm going to have a noise on top, which is going to be a little bit orange. So we'll make it a bit of a funky texture. But on this one, I'm going to, again, black mask it. Let's do a quick save. Black mask it with a fill. Into that fill, I'm just going to add a noise. I'm going to grab a noise from the other monitor. Because like I said, I keep my assets folder on my other monitor because I've got two of them. Like that one. I'll drag Dirt 4 in. There we go. And then I'll add another one in. Add a fill. This one's going to be this crystal 1. And then I'll make this like tile by 10. So it's very noisy like that. Ooh, that's kind of pretty. And then I'll set that to linear dodge add, so you get this kind of noise like that. I'll just see what happens when I apply some height to it. So I'm going to apply it to this one. Like that. Ooh, that's quite pretty. Now what you will see is some of the wood grains coming through there as well, and that's because the heights and how they're working. So if I want to stop a height coming in underneath another height, that's because behind the scenes all the heights are being dealt with through layers that work with each other, you know, like linear dodge, replace, all that kind of stuff. So if I actually want to stop this coming through, what I'm going to do is go to height in my little drop down layer here, and I'm going to change this, where I've got the height actually on it, to normal, and change this one to normal. Change this one to normal. pass through. So I'm just gonna. So to stop, I have to remind myself how to do this then for a second. To stop lower level height information showing through other height information. Say you've got a piece of whatever with quite a lot of grain on it, and then you want to put something on top, like a stain, a glob of paint, or something, and you'd want to stop that like wood information coming through in the height above it. What you got to do is go to both your height and normal settings on the layer you want to block. To be blocked, to be blocking. So for instance, I want the wood grain to be blocked from below and just have this kind of noise here. What I'm going to do is come to height and normal in this little drop down, and I've got to come to the layer that's creating the height and change it from whatever that is. It's probably going to be like a linear dodge add to a normal, and then I do that on the normal as well. So I change that from whatever that was, it's color dodge or something, to normal, and that should block the normal information from underneath. Now I've got that little stain, and I've just colorized that so you can see it. There you go. So I've got this little stain folder here, which contains all this information, all this rough information here. But what I can do is literally just add a black mask to this. And we're going to add a paint to this, because what I'm going to do, I can paint in this information. I can paint back that globby information. See? And I can use all sorts of things. I can use stencils. So maybe this is like a blob. So stencil, or projection is what it's called here, is a little bit like decals inside Unreal. And it's a little bit like smart objects inside Photoshop. If I press 3 on the keyboard, you're going to get this white box coming up, and this is the projection window. And what I can do is actually paint in whatever this covers. So you can see if I try and paint outside of here on the right hand side there, it's not going outside of that one area. So it's limiting me. But what I can do is also put an image inside there. So I'm just going to use something from in here, and I'm going to just go to, I don't know, splat. See if there is a splat. No, let's go for, I don't know, the search stuff. So here. So maybe this brush smudge. This is just an alpha. This isn't necessarily a brush or anything like that. It's just an alpha. So what I'm going to do is drag that in my, before I do that, in my properties here. So I'm in my projection mode, like that. And in my properties, so just to, before I do this, so we add a black mask to that folder, so it gets rid of everything, and then to that black mask I add a paint modifier, so it allows me to paint back in, and on that paint I press 3 for my projection. Many, these are step by steps, but once you do it a few times you'll get it. And I'm just going to grab whatever I want to put down. So I've got this smudge here, this brush smudge. I'm going to drag it to the grey scale that's at the bottom of this menu. So I click and drag that in, and then it's going to replace whatever I see here. So now you can see that I've got this little brush menu, this brush icon here. And what I can do is both the 2D and the 3D view. I can angle the camera, and then if I hold S and right click, I can scale it, and S and left click, I can rotate it. So I can put I can put it here. I can also do this in the 2D view, but I'll just do it in the 3D view. I can say right there. There's going to be a smudge. Cool. And then what if I drag this in? And then there's going to be it. So I can add to it. Oh, can kind of add to it a little bit. Oh, I've got to be careful about this. I will probably have to do, I'll add another modifier on top. I set this to linear dodge add as per usual, because these are black and white values. There we go. So if I want to add another stain on top and like build a stain in a custom shape, I add another modifier, another paint modifier, change that to linear dodge add, and then if I do it again, so I'll just add another paint modifier to that, change that to linear dodge add again, because as I keep reminding you that paint, when you linear dodge add, it doesn't override the black and white values, they sit together. And I'll do this brush circle. I'll do that, and I'll make it like a little bit big like this. So there we go. So now I've got this like kind of clump there, and that's just being controlled by the layer group right there. turn on and off. And because these are all, again, fill layers and whatever, I can come in here and just start messing with stuff. You know, maybe I want to increase the height a little bit, just a touch. Maybe you want to increase the height on this one. Just a touch, like that. Maybe increase the roughness. Or maybe decrease it. Maybe this is like a shiny gloss. Yeah, like that. But then on this layer above it, I'm gonna add this roughness. I'm gonna increase it so I can start to get a bit of texture in there. Look at that. And of course, if I want to, I can always just change these colors to be absurd colors. You know, whatever I want. So let's say someone's put some red paint or some yellow paint on top of this years ago, when they were decorating the house and they were painting the walls disgusting 70s yellow. There you go. So all that kind of fun can be had. And that's just on the wood section. So as we kind of work our way around and keep texturing this, we can have some real fun with it. You've just got to think about the history of stuff. A couple of things I'm going to do on the wood section just to kind of finalize it a little bit is make some separations where these wood panels are connecting and maybe put some pins in there as well. So I'll add another fill layer as per usual. I just want to do color height roughness I want. And I want this color to be a darker color because I want this to be, at least for now, I want this to be a multiply, some darkening. I'll add a black mask as per usual. To that black mask, I'm going to add a paint. And this I want to be on top of everything because I want, obviously, when these two panels are meeting, you're not going to have wood grain or you're not going to have roughness overlapping them. That roughness is going to be associated with this top panel, and this roughness is going to be associated with this side panel. So now, you know, I can start painting in that information. I might as well go a bit hardcore with it at first anyway, but I will change my brush to something a bit nicer for this. A little bit noisy at the same time, but something's going to give me some... Ooh, basmati rice, what is that going to do? Is that going to give me... No, it's too noisy. Chalk strong. Okay, that kind of works for what I'm thinking, but maybe the detailing on the side's a bit too much, so I can maybe go for chalk, straight up chalk. Nope. Charcoal, what's this one? Charcoal full frame. Okay, yeah, I can deal with that. Let's make it nice and small, obviously. And I'm going hardcore on my height because I can adjust that later on. Now what I'm going to do on this is just make sure I have got tangent warp or camera laid on because I do actually want to go across both of these planes. So what I'm going to do is either do this in the 2D view or do this in the 3D view. So I think I'll try it in the 3D view. And I'll just try and angle my camera side on like that because I can see where this is going to go right across there. And I'm going to click in the origin point, hold shift and then drag. Because I click first because that's going to be where the shift comes from, where the straight line. Again, this is like in Photoshop. I'm going to start drawing a straight line across like that. And I can do it from like here, hold shift, drag across like that. And then I can do it from here, click, hold shift, drag across. That shouldn't be going on the opposite side. That should be nice. Yes, good. And then underneath here, in fact, what I'm going to do is look on the 2D view for this one because I can't, because this panel's in the way. So I'll look for... So it's on here. It's there. So it's more on the side part. So it's one of the thin pieces. There we go. So there it is there. And I can just click shift. Click across. There we go. And if I want to, I can paint it a little more in. And then do the same thing on the other side. And I could also just straight up freehand this, you know. I am drawing straight lines because this would have been some kind of carpentry when it was made, with like dovetail joints and all these lovely stuff, but you know, I can make it wobbly if I want to, so that's quite nice already. Cool. Let's jump back to that. I'm going to add a lot of roughness. I'm going to bring the height back a little bit so it's not quite as intense. And maybe I might add some other modifiers to this. So on top of the paint modifier, I'm going to add a filter. And that filter is going to either a bevel, or I could have a histogram, or I'm going to see if I can just tighten this up a little bit, because it's a little bit unnatural, this shape. So I'm just going to see if I can just affect it a smidge. Surround. Like that. Okay, yeah, so now that kind of looks kind of like what I want, although it's, I might need to go back to here, got some paint modifier, because I love the way that this, like, I always say this, I always keep going to it, working like this in this very non-destructive way allows me to keep going back and forth from different areas, because I've got this paint modifier, and if I just paint this paint modifier in anywhere, it's automatically getting affected by the thing above it, but I can turn that thing on and off at will. The only problem being, as I'm working at a high resolution in my text set settings, I'm working on a 4K at the minute, it might be a bit chuggy, so if I can put it down to 2K, it'll just alleviate a bit of stress off the engine. There you go. And I can bring that information in, because I can see that I've got some information from it here, but it's not quite traveling on, so I can just paint some of that in. You know, I can make sure that I'm hitting both sides of this UV. Take a bit of time. It's a very different process when it comes to the care that's being taken, because now I need to be a bit more careful about stuff. I need to, you know, take my time, pay attention to stuff. Whereas when we're doing big tiling textures, we can be a bit more kind of slapdash. You see all the way to the end there. Okay, cool. And then, you know, it might be a bit big, but I can, you know, this seam might be a bit big, but I can deal with it, like, and stuff. Now, if we were to do this the multiple UDIM way, I would have a bit more flexibility there, because the pixels are bigger. I've got a little bit more kind of room. I've basically got twice as much space to work with. But because this is obviously in a single UDIM, because I'm dealing with pixels here, it's a little bit less easy to get in there and do the really, really small details. It's one of them things. It's stuff we've just got to deal with. Cool. And then, like I said, we can come in there and just start to... push some of that information. Now, I have also got opacity that can be used, so I'm going to pull my opacity down on this so I can gently nudge some of this information back in. Tying up some of those edges. There we go. Nice. So that already looks quite nice, but again, I can come in there and start messing with stuff. I can come back, add above this modifier, I'm going to add another filter, and this filter is going to be something like a slope blur. So obviously, that's a bit too much, but we've used this before, so what I'm going to do is just bring this intensity, well, bring it up to intensity 10. That already looks really nice. And then just bring it down a little bit. Or maybe even intensity 100. Start pulling it up. Mess with some of these settings. What does this one do? What does this one do? What does the quality do? What does the source parameters do? You know, let's have a play. because then that might inform me about other stuff. So if I've got a little bit of a thing here, I might think, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come down to, there you go, the thing that's controlling that. I'm going to go to that paint. I'm going to start chipping out some of that information. You know, paint some of that in, or even adding a new layer above it. And I'm just going to do height and roughness on this one. So that shouldn't be affecting the roughness. It kind of is. Oh, because I have to have a black mask, that's fine. Yeah. There we go. See, when I'm excited, I forget stuff myself as well. And then to that, so I'm going to, this height. Always name your layers. Always name your layers. And to that, I'm going to add this. So I can start to just pull some of that in. Maybe chill the stroke opacity down. And maybe I do a bit of flow jitter, angle jitter, tiny bit of size jitter, and a fraction of position jitter. There we go. I can start to chip some of this stuff out like that. In fact, I'm going to just add a colour on top of this as well, and that colour is going to be overlaying or something, and that roughness is going to be very rough. And effectively what I'm doing here is I'm just giving myself deeper cuts. Better brush for this, I think. I am doing this with a mouse, obviously, so it's a bit tricky. I don't know actually I don't know where my pen is actually. There we go. So I can rough that up a little bit. Paint it back in. That's not working at all. So yeah, you can see what I'm doing. Very, very cool. Very, 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 very cool. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is, I'm not going to go through and text the whole thing. The last thing I'm going to show you on the wood is, oh, I've already done it, sorry. I was going to say doing this, but I've already shown you how to do it. So, and if you think about this as well, obviously I've added colour and a bit of height and roughness, but if you just want to do roughness to show like a certain type of stain, maybe you could even show a bit of lightness and a bit of roughness where maybe a sticker once was, or maybe there used to be a little screwed on, brand thing, and it's fallen off, and it's obviously when you've got something that's been covered up and the whole thing is a bit dirty, but when you take off this plaque thing, everything behind it's clean, stuff like that. So I'm going to jump on. Obviously I'm not going to text you the whole thing in one session in this, because this will take me like a couple of days to do maybe, for the level that I want to get it to. But now what I'm going to do is just move on to the screen, to this bit here. And so this is the fabric section, like that. Turn fabric on, boom. So this one's dead easy. This one's going to be a nice quick one to do, but I've got a few things I like doing for this kind of stuff. So I've got my colour there. So what now I want to just get the fabric going on. So I've got the colour for now, but I want to get the height of the fabric. So quickly do a save. So I've added a layer there. There you go. I've added a fill layer there into the fabric. There we go. And all I'm going to do is use roughness and height for this. So I'm turn those on, and just pump the roughness, the height up a little bit, and pump the roughness up. Again, this is my fabric. I'll call it fabric height. All your name layers. Add a black mask. To that black mask, I'll add a fill. To that fill, I'll just grab the thing that I want. So I'm just going to unfilter everything and look for fabric. And we've got a bunch of fabric stuff in here, and the one that I want is that Weave 2. Weave 2. You've also got all this kind of stuff like mesh, which this one is only like a it's like a millimeter space, so you have to tile that a lot. Where Weave is more like a directional kind of latticing kind of effect. But let's just have a play. Let's put let's put mesh 2 in there. And obviously make sure that my height is enough. We're not seeing it because it's so big. So in that mesh there, I'm just going to start tiling this 100 times. There we go. So now we start seeing it. Maybe if I tile it 200 times. 300 times. You know, boom. I got kind of like a bit of a fabric thing. 250. I think that's a bit small, so maybe 250. I could do a bit of rotation just to kind of make it look a bit more interesting. So that already gives me a ton of information. What I do have to think about is what the output of my texture is going to be. So I'm texturing it at 4K at the minute, just so it's giving me all the information. But if this is going to be output at 2K, and I put this as 2K, what information is being left behind, you know, after that compression? That actually leaves quite a lot of information behind, which is quite nice. If this was 1K, now we're starting to lose it a little bit. We're starting to get a bit more of a rougher as in quality wise, not rough as in like, you know, parameter wise, but you know, 2K still looks good, which is quite nice. 1K we could probably get away with. And you know, we've got settings to this mesh, so we've got this histogram position. We've also got the histogram contrast. We've got the pattern. This is our tiling, I guess. So actually, you know, if I set that back to 1, I start tiling this up, and then I can put that as like, it was 250 on it. So I get the same stuff. In fact, it's not actually looking as nice when I do it like that. So I'm going to set that back to 1, and I'm going to tile it like this. So it's 250. That looks much nicer, in my onion. Yeah, maybe 150. 1.8, so I can, yeah, I'm just finding a number that I like. Okay, cool. Awesome. So this is okay, but again, we're adding history to it, aren't we? We're adding depth and stuff. So I've got to think about what's going to happen to this screen. The color at the minute, I could, you know, I can change that on the fly. So we have got roughness on this as well, but the roughness I've currently got is I could use that as like the overall roughness of the object. So if I just bring the roughness all the way down, then we've got a super shiny, very, very noisy surface. If I bring it up, you know, it's going to start whatever. So it's going to be quite high roughness, I reckon. Let's put some color information in there. So I'm going to add another color, just color. I'm going to add this to be this color, but a bit darker, maybe a bit more desaturated. For now, and then again black mask. Now I'm going to explore those generators again because there's a few that might be fun for this. So I'm going to add a generator, and this one I'm going to look. There's one called Rust or Dripping Rust. This one. So I'm curious. See what Dripping Rust gives me. Okay, gives me something. See what these parameters do. Okay. Let me just make this. I'll make this a bright, there we go, a very noticeable color at first, so I can see what's going on. There we go. So let me just start to, so you can see what happens. It's using the ambient occlusion, it's using the position, it's using curvature to basically try and figure out where obviously rust is going to drip. If we think about how rust drips in the real world, rust is created by moisture, and moisture collects on the underside or in the crevices of stuff, and never on flat surfaces. Rarely on flat surfaces anyway. So it's going to create it up there. I don't really like it being here, but we know we can get rid of it. The dirt sample amounts is just basically giving you your quality, so I'll just keep that up high. Smoothness is, so maybe, yeah, I don't want to be like super streaky, but maybe just buff that up a little bit. Dirt intense to streak intensity, I quite like that to be quite intense. Spread smoothness, I want that to be like that. You know, I can check out these different, ooh, that's quite interesting. That's quite interesting as well. So in fact, I might use some of this to have fun with. Okay, so I'm going to add a paint to this and just start to paint out. In fact, no, I'll take away the paint for now. I'm going to duplicate this, set it to obviously linear dodge add. On this new one I've just duplicated, I'm going to set this to red, like that. And then again, I'm going to start messing with some of the parameters. So maybe I want this to be a bit more horizontal, but less less smooth. Like that maybe, and I'm going to bring down the intensity. So like that. Cool, and then I'm going to add that paint modifier on top, and then I'm going to paint out some of that information with a nice, noisy, soft brush. So cement. Cement's a good brush, I like it. So let me up the flow a little bit. There we go. So there might be brushes as well that you kind of fall back onto thinking, oh, I really like that brush, or I really like that brush. I really like the cement brush when I'm doing this kind of work, because then I can kind of very, very softly bring stuff in. And what I'm thinking about as well is just where stuff builds up. Because obviously I've got this lime green colour, it looks horrible. I'm just using that as a debug. So let me get to a better colour. Let me get something that's going to work for me. Okay, and I can change the original colour to something a bit more like what it would be. It's kind of browny colour like that. Cool. And again, you'd keep adding and adding and adding and doing stuff. So, you know, if I want to do fabric stuff, it's like that. So the last thing I want to show you is how I would go about creating custom alphas. Because one thing I might want to do is add little numbers on these dials. So we have like, you know, 1 to 10. Is how I would add possibly something on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Photoshop, create something, come back and show you how we do it. Okay, so I've created something like this, just as a tester. It might not work, might will work. The numbers are definitely going to work. The little inner ticks might not work, but I'm just giving it a go. You know, this all depends on how it actually fits on the surface of the object. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this out as a PSD. So file, save as PSD, save it to desktop. I'm going to call this dial alpha. Now the reason I'm saving it as a PSD is because Painter understands PSDs. It is an Adobe Photoshop, it is an Adobe package, but even before that it did accept PSDs, and that's a good thing to do because it actually gives us the best quality. So I'm going to jump back into Painter and I'm going to bring that in. So I'm going to file, import resources, and I'm going to find my PSD, dial alpha. And I'm just going to define it as an alpha up the top there, so it knows how to filter it, it knows what its job is. And then I'm probably only going to use it for this project, so I'm just going to import your resources to project SM Radio. If I know that I'm only ever going to use it for that one session, I'm going to do current session. Not really 100% why that's useful. Or if I know I'm going to create something that I'm going to use all the time, I've created my own tool, I can add it to library. But I'm just going to add it to SM Radio. Import. There we go. So now it is in my assets library. There's an alpha. And that's just a PSD. That easy. You can create, wherever you can create PSDs, you can create these alphas. So what I'm going to do is use that projection method I did before to add a bit of information onto these two dials. And then the same approach can be done for this here. Now the video is running on a bit long. I think this is going to be about 2 hours long, so I'm not going to bother doing this here. But as you can see, I don't think I need to go over the rest of this. I might, in my own time, finish this off just for poops and giggles and stuff, but you can see how we can go about stuff. You know, I was talking about adding the pins in there, but you know, if we just think about that being a rough metallic greyish surface, all you have to do is either project or sketch in, draw in where the pins are going to be, and they're not going to be like round pins. They might probably be like staple pins, like they'll be like little lines. Again, observe this kind of stuff, or maybe that's in there because you want to give an indication that someone's maybe repaired this. Maybe it's been falling apart. Someone's driven a pin through it just to hold these two parts together. Tell a story. So what I'm going to do is find my dials. There we go. I'm going to set these. I'm just going to make these black. Not jet black, but fairly black. I'm going to give it a base roughness of something quite rough. Now for these dials, for these dial numbers, what I'm going to do is have these be white. So I'm going to make a new layer, keep it white. I want a bit of rough height, and I want some roughness. I'm going to make these quite shiny. And I'm going to make these quite deep. But of course, black mask. And then of course, paint, because we're doing a projection this time. So instead of using a fill, I want to use a paint because I want to project these on. And I'm not going to project them in here. I'm going to project... Actually, no, I am going to project them in here. You know what? How did I actually unwrap these? I'm saying I'm going to do this. But how did I actually unwrap these? Because I might have to do them in 3D to kind of get the best results as I can. Have I got round things for my dials, or are all those strips? So these are strips. I've kind of shot myself in the foot a little bit with this one. If that's the case, what I can do is experiment with doing it as a strip of numbers instead, and projecting them onto the strip here. I think these are them. But what I'm going to do is try and just project them onto here to see how it goes. Again, this might be a big failure. It might be a success. We'll see. If I even want to have these on. Again, I'm just showing you something we can do and the power of it. So, I'm a paint. I go to projection. I'm going to grab my dial alpha and just put it into the grayscale at the bottom of here, which has currently still got the circle brushing from before. So I'll click and drag that dial alpha in. Boop. And then I just have to move that over the top. Like that. And start to just push it in. Now it's not looking too bad. I think that was a bit of a happy accident with those marks there, but that's because we're at a low resolution, and it's not really. Even at 2K, it's not very well projecting. It's not projecting very well. There you go. But at 4K when it comes in, there we go. So I do have to look at what I'm doing, and when I first made this, I can't remember what I was thinking about the textures. I don't remember if I was going to try and do something like this with the textures. But I obviously, coming back to it 3-4 years later, because this is an old model I made a few years ago, you know, I thought, oh, what if I just do this? Obviously, it's not the right result. It's not the best thing to do. So maybe I go back, make another alpha where I still use the numbers, but I make it so it's going to fit around the outside. Where's my brush? Whoop, there you go. Outside of this here. And then this is going to be a strip, so maybe I make them little ridges, because I don't mind these ridges. Not white, but maybe to a black. I make these ridges going across vertically. Again, you know, I'm not particularly fussed. And then, of course, this is connected to a fill layer with a black mask, so I can always change stuff. I can pull down that height. I can push up that roughness. Pull down that. Maybe it's very, very shiny. So, you know, from a distance, you know, it looks okay, that. But obviously up close, it's going to look like crap. This would work a lot better if I didn't have this step in here, but one of the downsides of Painter is I can't actively update a mesh and then just expect it to know where to put these textures and stuff. It doesn't work as nicely as that. Sometimes it does work, sometimes it doesn't work. So I tend not to. I tend to think ahead. I tend to try and make decisions ahead of time for stuff like this. Obviously, that's where reference comes in. As a texture artist, as a 3D artist, you're going to be working off a concept anyway, so that concept's going to inform you anyway. This is the danger that I often find myself falling into. I do a lot of designing on the fly when I'm texturing or when I'm sculpting or building, and I always get in this kind of hole. But you know, so I'm going to leave it there because obviously I don't want to break this into a massive video, but you see the process. You know, if we're doing the plastic, what I got to think about is the quality of the plastic. How is the grime built up? I can use the ambient occlusion, invert the ambient occlusion. In fact, I will do that dead quick on this plastic bit as a last thing, just to show you what I mean. So this color is not actually too far away from what I want. So if I pull this to about here, like that. So I want some grime and build up. So I'm gonna grime. Something a bit funky. Maybe that, you know, whatever. I can always change it later on. Black mask. Now on this one, because I want this like build up of grime around this kind of plastic area, I'm going to use an ambient occlusion generator at first. But this is the one you've got to watch out for, because if I just click ambient occlusion, this happens. So it's kind of like the inverse of what I want. There you go. It's kind of like the inverse of what I want. What I wanted was the darkness to be in the recesses. And that's because of how an ambient occlusion mask works. The whiter, or mask in general, the whiter something is, the more you're going to see it. The blacker something is, the less you're going to see it. But if we look at our ambient occlusion, we can see that it's majority white because that white is where light is hitting. And the ambient occlusion, the darkness, is where light isn't getting. So we actually want to inverse this. Luckily, we do have a global invert. So on this generator, in parameters, we've got global invert. I'm going to click that, and now we've got this. Cool, so that can start to build up a little bit of grime inside there. Maybe bring in some roughness. So this is maybe just, well, if this is plastic, it's going to be quite shiny. Quite reflective. And then this grime is obviously going to push it back. But then because of this ambient occlusion generator, I can also kind of throttle it a bit, you know, push it like this. Okay. I'm going to add another generator. Make this linear dodge add because of course I want these two things to work together, and I could use the drippings. I need to chill it out a lot because that's obviously a lot, so I need to just chill it out. I need to soften it a lot. And I'm also going to pull down that intensity of the colour quite a lot. So I'm just going to suggest some of that information like that. You can see I'm starting to get a bit of information in there. So yeah, you go through and stuff like that. So I'm adding multiple generators. So yeah, I am actually going to leave it there now. And you know, that's the process of doing any kind of object. I've gone into a bit more detail than we might be putting into our objects in the hotel. But again, a lot of these hotels often have some sort of antiqued object to kind of show stuff off. You know, to give it that homely look. Unless it's like a super minimalist, super sleek hotel where everything's super clean. And this can be as simple as getting a, I don't know what we might like. Maybe you've got like an antique cash register. Maybe you've got like some nice flower pots, and you want the flower pot, or like these like little tin pots you sometimes get flowers in. So to have a nice pot for our flowers to go in is a part of our foliage setup. Maybe we have a uniquely textured pot, and it's made of this kind of like cheap brass material. So you're going to have, just look at them cheap brass pots you get flowers in. You know, they've got obviously the metallic value, but then there's almost like if we look at slope blur, it's almost like a slope blur quality to it, where it's like blotches of different values of roughness, and then maybe there's some wear and tear where it's been banged, and maybe there's a little bit of rust build up. So you just got to look at your references. Maybe on some of your chairs, maybe you want to have a chair which is really nice, but it's got, you know, it's a leather chair, and it's got flake and it's got edgeware where people have been sitting on it for ages, where there's, you know, rubbing, so it's rubbed some of the stain off. It's starting to peel in some areas. It's showing its age, that kind of stuff. You know, it's fine places to put this kind of information in. And some of them might not take that long at all. Some of them might take a couple of hours to make what you want to get out of it. Some of them might take a couple of days. You know, not everything has to be uniquely textured. Not everything has to be a trim sheet tiling texture. So, you know, pick and choose your battles. Cool, so I'm going to leave it there. And this is a bit of a longer video, but obviously there was a bit of setup at the beginning, and I've been explaining a lot of stuff as we go through it. Please stop the video in places, make notes, even slow the whole video down, watch in chunks, you know, do whatever you need to do so to assimilate this information in. Cool, and I'll see you in the next one.